The piano and the promised Margaret Walsh stood at 61 with everything she'd worked for: a thriving company, a penthouse office, respect from everyone who mattered. But her divorce was 5 years behind her now, and the silence in her life had grown louder than any success. The grand piano in her executive lounge had belonged to her grandmother. Margaret kept it there, polished and perfect, though she'd never learned to play. It was more memory than instrument now. On a quiet Thursday evening, Margaret worked late again. The building was nearly empty when she heard something that made her stop mid-sentence on a phone call. Piano music. Live piano music floating through the hallways. Someone was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, major, the piece her grandmother had played. Every Sunday afternoon when Margaret was young, she followed the sound to the executive lounge. Through the glass door, she saw him, Robert Hayes, the elderly janitor. 70 years old in his gray uniform, sitting at her grandmother's piano with his eyes closed, playing with such beauty it seemed impossible. Margaret pushed open the door. The music stopped abruptly. Robert stood quickly, his face flushing. "Ms. Walsh, I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have. Where did you learn to play like that?" Her voice came out harder than she meant it to. Years of boardroom negotiations had made softness difficult. "I taught piano, ma'am. 38 years. Before life took some turns." Margaret stared at him. She'd passed this man in the hallways for 6 years, nodded politely perhaps a dozen times, but never once wondered about his story. He was just part of the building's furniture. Something bitter rose in her throat, whether at him or at herself. She wasn't sure. "If you can play Chopin like that," she said, the words sharp with sarcasm, "I'll marry you." It was a cruel joke. Born from her own loneliness and the absurdity of finding such talent pushing a mop. The kind of cutting remark she'd learned to use as armor. Robert didn't flinch. He just looked at her with those calm, kind eyes. "Ms. Walsh," he said gently, "I don't think a piano performance is what you're really looking for." "Oh? And what am I looking for?" "Someone who sees you. Not your title or your success. Just you." The words hit harder than she expected. Margaret should have left. Should have pretended the moment never happened. Instead, she found herself sitting down in one of the leather chairs. "Play it again," she said quietly. Robert hesitated, then returned to the piano. This time she really watched him. The slight tremor in his left hand, the way he leaned to compensate, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of more than age, of grief, maybe, or loss. When he finished, she asked, "Why aren't you teaching?" Robert's hands rested on the keys. "I had a stroke 7 years ago. Lost some mobility here." He held up his left hand. "It ended my career. Lost my health insurance. My wife, Dorothy, she got cancer right after. The bills," he paused. "When she passed, this job was what I could get. And sometimes late at night like this, I get to remember who I used to be." Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. That comment I made, it's all right. Loneliness makes us say things we don't mean. How did you know I was lonely?" Robert smiled sadly. "Because I recognize it. It's the same face I see in the mirror." Margaret came back the next Thursday evening, and the Thursday after that. At first, she just listened while Robert played. Then slowly they began to talk. Real conversations, not the surface-level exchanges she was used to, but honest words about real things. Robert told her about Dorothy's garden, how she'd grown prize-winning roses, about his son in Oregon who called every week, about former students he still ran into sometimes, who'd tell him how he'd changed their lives. Margaret found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, how her ex-husband had called her married to the job, how her daughter barely spoke to her anymore, how she'd wake up in her beautiful home and wonder if anyone would even notice if she didn't show up to work one day. "Success is a strange thing," Robert said one evening. "We chase it thinking it'll fill us up, but sometimes it just leaves us emptier than before." "When did you get so wise?" "When I lost everything. That's when you learn what actually matters." 3 weeks into their Thursday evenings, Margaret made a decision. "Teach me," she said. Teach me to play that nocturne. Robert looked startled. Ms. Walsh, Margaret. Please call me Margaret. Margaret, you could hire any teacher in the city? Someone younger, someone with... I don't want someone younger. I want someone who understands what that music means. What my grandmother heard in it. What you hear in it. She paused. I want someone who plays like it matters. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. But I should warn you, I'm a demanding teacher. Good. I've been too comfortable for too long. And so began the most humbling experience of Margaret's life. She was terrible. Her fingers felt thick and clumsy. Her timing was off. She'd built a company from nothing, negotiated million-dollar deals, but she couldn't master a simple scale. Robert was patient, endlessly patient. Music isn't about control, he'd say. It's about surrender. You're trying to force it. Let it flow through you. Weeks turned into months. Margaret started leaving work earlier. Started taking walks. Called her daughter, Sarah, and had their first real conversation in years. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, she learned to play. One December evening, 6 months after that first night, something remarkable happened. Margaret was practicing the nocturne when something shifted. Her fingers found their rhythm. The music stopped being notes on a page and became something alive, something that breathed. When she finished, she looked up to find Robert with tears streaming down his face. That was it, he whispered. That was exactly it. Margaret felt tears on her own cheeks. I finally understand what my grandmother meant. Why she loved this piece so much. It's about... She struggled for words. It's about holding on to beauty even when everything hurts. Robert nodded. Yes, exactly yes. That evening, Margaret made another decision. I'm creating a new foundation, she said. The Dorothy and Robert Hayes Foundation for Music Education. It'll fund music programs in schools that can't afford them, and I want you to run it. Full salary, full benefits, a team to support you. You'll bring music back to kids who've never touched an instrument. Robert stared at her. Margaret, I'm 70 years old, and you have wisdom I can't buy and passion I can't teach. This is what you were meant to do. What Dorothy would want you to do. She paused. What I need you to do. Because you've given me so much, and I want to give something back. Robert's voice shook. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Please say yes. Yes, he whispered. Yes. At the company holiday party, Robert performed for 200 people. He played Chopin, Debussy, some jazz standards, and closed with a Christmas medley that had everyone singing. Margaret stood at the back with her daughter Sarah, who'd driven up from Philadelphia. They'd spent Thanksgiving together, their first real holiday in 8 years. Mom, Sarah said softly, you seem different. Happier. I am happier. I finally learned to see what was right in front of me all along. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Robert played the nocturne one more time. Margaret sat beside him at the piano, playing the simpler left-hand part while he carried the melody. They weren't perfect. She still stumbled over the harder passages. But they played it together, and in that moment, it was the most beautiful thing Margaret had ever been part of. When they finished, Robert said, Do you remember what you said that first night? About marrying me if I could play Chopin? Margaret winced. I'm still ashamed of that. It was cruel. No, Robert said gently. It was honest. You were looking for something real in a world that had become hollow. You just didn't know what you were looking for yet. And now you found it. Not romance. We're too old and wise for that kind of foolishness. He smiled. But family, friendship, purpose, all the things that make a life worth living. Margaret took his hand. You saved my life, you know. Not dramatically, quietly, the way music saves us, by reminding us we're still capable of feeling something true. And you saved mine, Robert said. By seeing me, by asking me to play, by remembering that janitors have stories too. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and gentle over the city lights. Inside that executive lounge, two people who'd been invisible to each other had become the most important person in each other's lives. Margaret looked at her grandmother's piano and thought of all the years it had sat silent. All the years she'd been too busy, too driven, too armored to let beauty in. What the janitor had done hadn't left her speechless at all. It had given her back her voice, the one she'd lost somewhere along the climb to success. And in learning to play his music, she'd learned to play her own life differently. With more grace, more patience, more love, it's never too late to begin again. Never too late to let someone teach you what matters. All we have to do is stop, listen, and let ourselves be changed by the quiet grace of another human soul. That's the real music. That's the real marriage, not to another person, but to life itself in all its broken, beautiful truth.